The snowstorm had swallowed the entire valley by the time the woman stumbled into Broken Ridge, clutching a newborn baby to her chest as if the wind itself was trying to tear the child away from her. No one knew her name. No one recognized her torn dress, her bleeding feet, or the bruises along her face. But every soul in town stopped when she cried out those trembling words that rang across the frozen street like a church bell, cracked in half. "Take my baby. Let her live." And in that moment, the only man who moved toward her without hesitation was an old rancher named Wes Calden, a quiet widower known more for his silence than his courage. He stepped through the swirling snow, dusted flakes from his long coat, and studied the young woman's shaking hands. She could barely stand. Her lips were blue, yet her eyes burned with a desperation far hotter than the icy wind around them. Wes lifted her arm gently, steadying her before she collapsed across the wooden fence. People had begun gathering, storekeepers, ranch hands, travelers passing through, murmuring with that cruel curiosity small towns often carried. Who was she? Where did she come from? And what kind of mother tries to give away a child in a storm? But Wes didn't care about their whispers. He didn't even glance at the crowd. His voice was low, calm, the same tone he used to soothe frightened horses. "What happened to you?" he asked. The woman tried to answer but broke into sobs, her voice shredded by cold and fear. Behind them, Wes's adopted son, little Jonah, peeked from behind his father's coat, his round blue eyes fixed on the baby, wrapped in the thin piece of cloth. The child wasn't moving, not crying, not even stirring. That frightened Wes more than anything. A baby should cry in weather like this. A baby should fight, but this one lay silent, like her tiny spirit was drifting somewhere between here and heaven. Wes reached out his gloved hands. "Let me hold her." The woman hesitated, her arms tightening instinctively. But then her knees buckled, and she surrendered, the baby into his arms with a broken breath. "Please," she whispered, "please don't let them take her." "Her," Wes said softly. "Someone's after you." The woman didn't answer with words. She only looked over her shoulder, toward the white horizon where the storm roared hardest. Wes followed her gaze and noticed something, faint shapes moving through the storm, riders, several of them, dark silhouettes against a world of white. His jaw tightened. He knew trouble when he saw it. He had lived through more than his share. He lifted the baby closer to his chest, shielding her with his coat, and gestured toward the nearby barn. "Come on," he whispered to the woman. "We need to get you both inside." But she shook her head violently. "No. If they find me here, they'll burn your whole town to the ground. They don't care about laws. They don't care about witnesses. They want her, only her." The crowd behind them stiffened, wary now, sensing the danger. A few stepped back toward their homes. A few others muttered that she was probably lying. People in Broken Ridge were used to gossip, not gunfights. But Wes had seen fear like hers before. Years ago, during a border raid that left half his cattle dead and his wife buried under red clay soil. He understood what it meant for a mother to stand before death to save her child. He took off his coat and wrapped it around the woman's shoulders, ignoring her protests. "You're freezing," he murmured. "You can't protect anyone in this condition. Let me help." She looked up at him with trembling eyes. "Why would you help me?" "You don't even know my name." Wes gently adjusted the coat around her. "Lady," he said, "you don't need a name for someone to show you kindness." That simple sentence hit her harder than the storm. She swallowed, tears freezing on her cheeks as she whispered, "My name is Ilara, and this is my daughter, Hope." Wes nodded once. Hope, a good name. Jonah tugged on his father's sleeve, his small voice muffled by the scarf wrapped around his mouth. "Pa, is the baby gonna die?" Wes knelt down, shifting the tiny infant in his arms. "Not if I can help it." But even as he said it, he felt how cold the child was. She weighed almost nothing. She needed warmth, milk, safety, things she had gone too long without. Wes stood again and turned toward the saloon, the only building with a stove burning hot enough to warm a newborn quickly. He took Ilara by the arm. "Come on." But when they took their first step, a gunshot cracked through the blizzard. The sound echoed across the town like lightning splitting the sky. People screamed and dove for cover. Horses whinnied from their posts. Jonah clung to the fence, his eyes wide with terror. Wes turned sharply, shielding the baby with his body. Through the thick snow, the riders emerged fully now, 6 men on horseback, all wearing dark coats and carrying rifles. The leader, a tall man with a scar cutting across his cheek like a river of fire, raised his weapon again. "Hand over the child," he shouted, his voice booming above the wind. "Give her to us, and the woman lives. Give her to us, and we'll leave your town in peace." Ilara collapsed against Wes, sobbing harder than ever. "They'll kill her. They'll kill her just like they killed." She couldn't finish. Wes stepped forward, his own heartbeat thundering. He didn't know who these men were or why they wanted the child, but he knew one thing with absolute certainty. He would never hand a baby over to men with murder in their eyes. Not today, not ever. He looked back at the townsfolk, hiding behind crates and porch posts. Their fear pressed into his back like a weight. Broken Ridge was peaceful, quiet, unprepared for violence. And yet, something deep inside, Wes, something carved into him. The day he buried his wife rose like fire through his veins. He shifted the baby in his arm, placing his other hand firmly on Ilara's shoulder. Then he whispered the words she had begged for from the moment she arrived. "I'll protect her. I'll protect both of you." The riders stopped about 20 yards away, forming a half circle. Their horses snorted steam into the air. Behind them the storm began to ease, just enough for everyone to see the hatred carved into their faces. The leader, scar-faced and smirking cruelly, pointed at Wes. "You're making a mistake, old man. That child ain't yours." "Don't matter," Wes called back, his voice carrying across the frozen ground. "She's under my care now." The man let out a barking laugh. "Care? This ain't charity. This ain't some stray calf. That baby's got a price on her head bigger than this whole damn town. Give her to me, or we start killing people until you do." The townsfolk gasped. Parents pulled their children inside. The sheriff peeked out from behind the jailhouse door, pale as a ghost. But Wes didn't move. He held Hope tighter, feeling the faintest flutter of her breath. Jonah stood half-hidden behind the fence, his small hands gripping the wood so hard his knuckles turned white. Ilara leaned against Wes, half-conscious, half-frozen, but still whispering, "Don't give her to them. Please don't." Wes didn't look at her. He didn't look at the crowd. He stared straight at the gunman and lifted his chin. "If you want her," he said slowly, "you'll have to go through me." A ripple of fear moved through the people of Broken Ridge. Some begged Wes to reconsider. Some whispered that he had lost his mind. But others, those who remembered the man he used to be, stood a little straighter. There was a time when Wes Calden had been the best shot in 3 territories. A rancher feared and respected across the plains. A time before grief had stolen the fire from him. Now watching him stand, against armed riders, with nothing but a baby in his arms and a woman at his side, the townsfolk felt that old fire flicker back to life. Ilara looked up at him with a mixture of disbelief and hope. "You don't even know what they want with her," she whispered. Wes kept his eyes locked on the riders. "Doesn't matter. I know what they'll do if they get her." The leader raised his hand, signaling his men to ready their rifles. "Enough talk," he snarled. "Give me the baby, or your whole town dies today." Wes shifted his stance, the snow crunching beneath his boots. The world seemed to hold its breath. Jonah looked up at his father, tears freezing on his lashes. "But what are you going to do?" Wes swallowed once, feeling the weight of the moment. The weight of the infant against his chest. The weight of a woman who had already survived too much. He whispered without turning, "Jonah, get behind me." And then, like a man stepping back into the fire, he thought he'd left behind forever. Wes Calden squared his shoulders, tightened his grip on the baby, and prepared to face the whole town and the devils. Beyond it, because no child would die on his watch, not while he still drew breath. And as the snow swirled around him like a shroud, he made a silent vow. He would live, or he would die. But hope would not fall into the hands of monsters. And viewers, if you want to hear how this story unfolds, make sure you hit the subscribe button so you never miss the next chapter of this unforgettable journey. The moment the gunmen lifted their rifles, the air in Broken Ridge seemed to freeze harder than the snow beneath their boots. Wes Calden stood at the center of it all, the baby pressed against his chest. Ilara leaning weakly on the fence beside him, and little Jonah trembling just behind his coat. The riders spread out, their horses kicking up bursts of white powder as they prepared to strike. Wes knew he had only seconds to decide, fight right here in the middle of town, putting innocent people at risk, or somehow force the danger away from the place he had sworn to protect. His breath fogged heavily in the frigid air as he slowly raised one hand in surrender. Not to give hope away, but to buy a precious moment of time. "Hold on," he shouted, his voice booming like a shot across the valley. "You want me? Fine, but leave the townsfolk out of this. Take your quarrel with me outside the ridge." The leader, scar-faced with eyes like cold steel, studied Wes with suspicion, then motioned for his men to halt. "You think you can bargain with us, old man?" Wes met his glare with unshakable resolve. "I'm the one holding what you want. If you kill us all here, you might hit the child." The leader's jaw twitched. He didn't care for Mercy, Wes could tell, but he cared deeply about that baby, too deeply. For what reason? That was the mystery gripping Wes's mind. After a tense pause, the scar-faced leader nodded once. "Fine, we settle this outside town. No citizens. But the woman stays." Ilara stiffened and clutched Wes's sleeve with shaking fingers. "No, don't leave me here. They'll kill me the minute you're out of sight." Wes felt the weight of her terror, and he knew she was right. These men wanted Hope alive, but Ilara was a loose end. He turned back to the leader. "She comes with us," Wes said, his voice low but iron-strong. "And so does the boy." The rider scoffed. "That child? He's got nothing to do with this." Wes didn't blink. "He's my son, and he stays with me." The leader hesitated, his men shifting uneasily. Finally, with a frustrated growl, he relented. "Fine, bring your little family, but step 1 foot the wrong direction, and all of you die." Wes nodded slowly. He knew the risks, but he also knew the terrain outside Broken Ridge better than any man alive. If there was a place he had any chance at protecting them, it would be out in the open, away from the townspeople who had already suffered enough storms. As the riders turned their horses and headed toward the ridge trail, Wes lowered his head and whispered to Ilara, "Stay close to me. Do exactly what I say." She nodded, her breath shallow, her eyes never leaving the tiny, sleeping face of her child in Wes's arms. Jonah held onto his father's pocket, his small legs stumbling in the deep snow as they followed the riders. The town watched in silent horror as Wes, Ilara, Jonah, and the newborn disappeared into the white wilderness, swallowed by the storm and the danger ahead. When they reached the ridge, the wind howled like a living creature, whipping Wes's coat around him. The riders circled the group, forming a ring of dark shadows against the bright snow. The scar-faced leader dismounted slowly, his boots sinking into the drift. He pointed at the baby in Wes's arms, his voice a frozen hiss. "Hand her over." Wes didn't move. His heart pounded with the weight of what he was about to say. "Not until you tell me why. Why does a newborn child matter to you? Why chase a mother halfway across the frontier?" The leader chuckled, but there was no humor in it, only bitterness. "That child is the bloodline of a man who owes me everything. Her father stole a fortune from us, fled in the night, and died before we could reclaim it. But he left something behind, something worth far more than gold. His legacy, his heir. That child is the only key to claiming what was rightfully ours." Ilara shook violently, tears spilling over her frozen cheeks. "You're lying. Her father died trying to protect her from you. You murdered him for refusing to hand her over. And now you want to finish what you started." The leader's face twisted with rage. "Don't speak to me of murder when your husband betrayed us." Wes's blood ran. Cold, betrayal, fortune, bloodline. This child wasn't. Simply wanted out of cruelty. The riders believed she represented power, money, claim over something greater, and they would not stop until she was in their hands. The leader stepped closer, his boots crunching ominously. "Last chance, rancher. Give me the girl." Wes shifted his stance, pulling Hope closer, and for the first time since his wife's death, he felt something awaken deep inside him, an old fire, a warrior's fire. "You know," Wes said quietly, "I buried my wife 10 winters ago. Lost my whole herd 2 years before that. I've lived more grief than most men can stomach. But today, I remembered what it means to stand for something worth dying for." The leader scowled. "And what's that?" "Hope," Wes whispered. The men around them raised their rifles. Ilara squeezed Wes's arm, fear choking her voice. Please don't do this." But Wes wasn't listening to fear. He was listening to duty, to purpose, to the heartbeat of the infant resting against his chest. In one swift motion, he pulled Jonah behind him, pushed Ilara toward a cluster of fallen boulders, and stepped boldly into the circle of riders. "If you want to take her, you're going to have to shoot me first." For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then the leader snarled, "Fine, have it your way." He raised his rifle, but the shot never came. Because at that exact moment the storm shifted, the wind slashing sideways with blinding force. And Wes used that instant to act. With a speed that surprised even himself, Wes lunged forward, grabbing the leader's arm and wrenching the rifle aside just as it fired into the air. Chaos erupted. The horses reared, men shouting as the sudden gust threw snow into their faces. Wes tackled the leader into the snow, rolling down a short embankment. Hope was still clutched in one arm, shielded by Wes's coat, while his free hand fought to keep the gunman's hands away from his knife. Below, Jonah screamed. Ilara crawled desperately toward them, but the other riders closed in around her. One grabbed her by the hair and yanked her to her knees. Another aimed his pistol at Jonah. Wes saw it all in a flash and roared with a fury that echoed through the valley. "You touch that boy and I'll gut you where you stand." The leader grinned spitefully, cold snow sticking to his beard. "You can't protect them. You're one man." Wes didn't answer. He headbutted the man hard enough to draw blood. The leader howled and reached for his pistol. Wes rolled, kicking him in the chest, sending him skidding backward down the slope. But Wes wasn't fast enough to escape the attention of the other riders who had begun closing in. Ilara screamed as one man dragged her by the arms. Jonah crawled behind a rock, crying uncontrollably. And in that moment, when all seemed lost, Wes made a choice that would define the rest of his life. He stood tall, hope still tucked against him, and shouted over the wind, "I am not afraid of you." For a moment the riders hesitated. Maybe it was the way he stood. Maybe it was the storm itself, swirling like judgment around them. Or maybe it was because they finally understood. They weren't fighting a broken rancher. They were fighting a father, a protector, a man who had nothing left to lose, but everything to give. Wes lifted his free hand and pointed directly at the leader. "Leave now. Leave and never come near this child again, or the storm will bury what's left of you." The leader spat blood into the snow. "Kill him!" he screamed. The riders raised their guns, but another sound cut through the air before they could shoot. Hoofbeats, dozens of them. From over the ridge, through the blinding veil of white, came the townspeople of Broken Ridge, armed with rifles, axes, pitchforks, and ropes, riding with fury in their eyes. They charged like a wave of determination, led by the sheriff himself, who shouted, "Nobody threatens our own." The riders panicked, trying to retreat, but the townsfolk descended like justice itself. Shots rang out, horses scattered. The leader tried to flee, but Wes tackled him down, ripping the pistol from his hand and pressing it to his chest. "If you ever come for her again," Wes growled, "I won't hesitate." The man's eyes filled with fear for the first time. He nodded frantically, scrambling away as the surviving riders fled into the storm. In minutes, the ridge was quiet again. Only the wind remained. Wes collapsed to his knees, breathing hard, holding Hope close while Ilara crawled to him, crying uncontrollably as she hugged her baby. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for giving her a future." Wes rested his hand on her shoulder. "She's safe now, and you're not alone anymore." The townsfolk surrounded them, some cheering, some crying, realizing they had stood together for something greater than themselves. A life, a mother, a future. Wes looked down at Hope, her tiny chest rising with stronger breaths now that the danger was gone. He felt something warm bloom in his heart, something he hadn't felt in years. Purpose, family, redemption. Ilara held. Jonah closed, tears dripping onto his hat. "You saved us all." Wes smiled softly. "No, we saved each other. As they walked back toward the town, the storm finally began to break, revealing sunlight spilling across the snow like a promise. And as this incredible story reaches its end, dear viewers, if you want more heart-shaking tales, more journeys of courage, love, and sacrifice, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you never miss the next story that might change your heart all over again.